You know, as you mentioned, ESPN and all the non-rights holders so restricted in what we're able to do. I mean, you know, this is a story of vast importance, and yet, you know, we're being issued not that many credentials, and a lot of other news operations are in the same boat. How incumbent upon those people who do get credentialed then will it be to cover, and a lot of these people are sports journalists, to cover what's going on in Tiananmen Square, if there is anything going on, outside the Olympic ring, as it were? How prepared is ESPN to do that?
Well, I think we're prepared to do it, and we can devote the resources to it if we make those kinds of decisions that there will be legitimate stories. The Olympics, for me, for my time, for the 20 years I've been at ESPN, it has always been daunting because it's the most controlled news event where you have really the least amount of access open to journalists. And in our business now, with what's happening at newspapers and in the news business cutting back, I think it's going to be a really difficult challenge for people to cover the stories outside of the events while covering the events. It's a matter of resources, a matter of access, and a matter of instinct of knowing where to go and what the story is going to be. And the American press coverage of this will dictate, I think, a lot of the world, the America's and even the world's opinion on this. So I'm just looking forward to it because I think it's the most interesting Olympics to cover in my lifetime.
And don't you think NBC's in a very interesting position? And again, my, you know, with I guess full disclosure, you know, working for ABC News, ESPN, and NPR, as well as USA Today, obviously I'm competing with NBC. Jeremy, you and I will work together, be on rooftops or in studios together.
Just the two of us against their army of hundreds.
But you know, that's fun because we can beat them at their own game. And here's why I think that, and we've done it. If NBC is a partner of the Beijing Olympics, anytime you have rights fees, ESPN buys a lot of events and is involved, or the sport buys, you know, the time on ESPN, whatever. And now you're in cahoots, as my mom used to say. Well, we're not in cahoots with Beijing, with the Olympics or the IOC. So this will be very interesting. And Dick Ebersol and David Neal are great minds, and they'll figure this out. But what does NBC do if this absolutely blows up? And you've got Michael Phelps swimming, but I've received a text message, and you've received a text message. Forget Phelps, get out to Tiananmen Square. And believe me, that's where we go. We're journalists first, sports writers second. And so does NBC now continue to show the pretty pictures of the swimming venue, or do they go and show what's going on in Tiananmen Square, whatever it may be, or protest in the stands even, that the Chinese officials who they're contracted with, they're in business with, do not want them to show? Fascinating decision. We, on the other hand, will be able to report it like crazy. We did this in Salt Lake. We broke the story with ESPN and USA Today. We broke the story of the Paris figure skating scandal and beat NBC at its own game for a full week. And it was great fun. And so I think, you know, I know you feel the same way I do, Jeremy. Let's go at them.
Yeah, it's an opportunity.
There's going to be more. I think there's even more pressure on the advertisers who are underwriting the Olympics, and they've already been called into question about what their views are on the human rights issue. And that's cutting to the real heart. Will the American business press look, and the people who cover the advertising sector of American business, kind of hold the feet of the advertisers to the fire on human rights issues?
I'm outnumbered here. I'm not a representative of NBC, but I am friendly with some people who are involved with NBC. And I want to offer a small defense on behalf of NBC. And first of all, ESPN doesn't have rights to cover the games live, and NBC does. And so they have an obligation to American sports fans to be covering the swimming meets. I know that Ebersol plans to cover protests insofar as they directly impinge on the games. So I'm sure that they'll have some coverage. They won't have the same kind of coverage that ESPN and NPR has. They have this other obligation, and they also happen to be long-term rights holders for the Olympics. That's an asset of theirs, and they want to keep it as pretty as possible. So, you know, I think what you guys are talking about is fantastic, and you ought to do it, But I wouldn't necessarily dump 100% on NBC if they don't, if they're not as probing.
I'm saying, though, that because of the situation they have, it could become a big conflict. I'm not dumping on them at all.
Yeah,
They're the big cheese.
Well, the key phrase there is as pretty as possible.
Yeah, and plausibly live.
That's true.